Hello. Today we have an adoptee coming to us from Naperville outside of Chicago. Please welcome Angela. So nice to have you, Angela.
Hi, thank you. I
Hi.
am very excited to be here. I love listening to your show, and it's helped me tremendously just in sorting through my own, adoptee feelings over the years. And it's like, oh, that's actually normal. So,
Yeah, right.
yeah,
It feels good to be normal. Like that's
exactly.
you're not the only
Yeah,
one. And this is your first podcast, we found out.
It is. Yeah. So I'm excited.
we love that. We were just talking before we came on that
I've
we have a
always known I
lot
was
of
adopted. So, first, yeah. It's just one of those things that, I don't think I ever really thought much about until you get older. It's something about being like, as you get older, it just kind of hits you different.
Yeah.
hmm
So how did you come tell your story how you want to tell it and how you came into this?
Yeah. So I was born in Nebraska in 1979. The agency that my parents had gone through was Lutheran Family Services.
I was from there.
Yeah, it's, everyone's Lutheran in Nebraska. So that was kind of the big agency. Um, And so it was a private adoption, but at the same time, it was kind of semi-private because I was able to write letters and send pictures to my birth mother, but they would all go through the adoption agency. And so I knew from a really young age that I was adopted and had a little bit of that communication. I got to read her letters. I knew what her handwriting looked like. I got to see
Wow.
pictures of
What
her.
were the circumstances of your adoptive parents adopting you? Were you the only one? Were there others? Were you, yeah.
Yeah, so my parents had a biological son who was 7 years older than me. And then they had another son that actually died at full term. She had like a uterus rupture and just was not able to have children after that again. So I think at that point they decided they wanted to adopt and they wanted a girl. And they were, very specifically wanted a girl. And it's kind of an interesting situation as I've gotten older. I've learned more of the details. I've found out how much it cost them.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and once they got the money to the adoption agency, then I think they were just next on the list. And my birth mother was actually misled as to my adoptive family, like what they were. She was told that my dad was a doctor, and my dad is not a doctor. I think basically to get her to choose them because they had
Oh,
paid the money. It's kind of one of those not a great situation. So yeah,
I find it interesting that you had back and forth communication. I don't know that I've heard of that in that era as much.
yeah. I guess I really don't know why. I don't know if that's just common for what they did at the time. So I knew my birth mother's first name, but I never knew her last name. And so that was all the information I could really have. Like she couldn't say like, "Oh, I live in California," which is where she lived.
Wow.
But I would get pictures of her and my half siblings, and there'd be palm trees in the pictures. So I always knew I was like, okay, they're somewhere on the coast, but never knew where. So there's just all those kind of
And in the
important details
letters,
left out.
Mhm.
What's that? I'm sorry.
in the letters, did she give you any, did she tell you like why you were put up for adoption? Or was that also something that wasn't
Yeah, I
really
wondered that.
allowed in the back and forth?
I think somehow I always knew that she was young. So she was 16 when I was born. She had some issues going on in her own family. And so she was basically a runaway. So she was kind of out living on her own. She had no support system.
Mm.
Um, and so I never have held any negative, feelings at all towards her. I was like, I, I can't blame her. She really had no resources to help her. So that was kind of her circumstances. Yeah, she was just very young. And then as I have gotten to know her, I've learned more about the details. I think growing up, I always just knew that she was young. And that
And
was
she was in Nebraska as a teen and then ended up in California.
She was originally from Illinois, where I live right now.
Oh,
Really coincidentally, I live very close to my biological aunts and uncles and cousins now. That's not where I grew up, and I coincidentally ended up in the same city. So it's really interesting.
That's bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But no, I think when she ran away, she went to California. She always wanted to go to California, and she had modeled and done some of that out there. And then I don't know all the details, but I believe that she basically had met my dad, and he was a truck driver, and she traveled with him across the country. And she just somehow at some point ended up in Nebraska. I mean, very random. And when she was pregnant, she ended up, I think, going to this agency, and they set her up living with a family and just basically set her up to live there until I was born. So yeah, it was all very random how she ended up there, but she's never lived there or anything.
That's what I
So
was gonna say. It's such an interesting place to be for
yeah,
her.
yeah, yeah.
And how did you feel growing up? Did you connect with your family or did you feel like a fish out of water? What was your circumstance growing up with your older brother? All of that.
Well, I think unfortunately I'm one of those situations where it was not the greatest for
Eh,
me. I always felt very unsettled. I always, I was one of those kids that I'd sit there all day at school and daydream about my mother coming to get me and
mm, yeah.
whisk me away. There are just a lot of issues with my adoptive family too. Like my brother had a lot of issues, and so there was always just things going on with him. Um, and I was just kind of like the compliant child, very in the background, never wanted to make anyone upset or, anything like that because they already had enough going on. Um, and so I don't feel like I ever really clicked
Mhm.
with them. Um, it's like they're your parents, you love them. And I had a good childhood. Like we had a nice home, we had, all the things, but there just was something missing. And so, yeah, I think as I've gotten
And
older, the distance has
yeah,
gotten more. Hmm.
and having your mom have the letters, I would think that would really make you feel. I was just thinking if I had that, that would be a very strange thing because you know that she's out there thinking of you.
Yeah, I don't know if it's better or worse. I've always kind of
Yeah,
gone back and forth. Like, is it better to know your birth parents as you grow up, or is it better not to? I don't know. I
I
think
don't
for
know.
me, it made me want to be with them more, especially seeing my siblings. I would see pictures of my siblings hanging out at the beach, and I'm in Nebraska. I was
Right.
like,
Yeah,
oh, it's very unfair.
yeah, it
Um,
is strange to
Hmm.
your your when your biology, you're biologically from someplace else. I mean, to
Yes.
me, it definitely felt palpable. Like I did not feel a sense of belonging where I would
Mm.
grew up. And, it turns out I was 20 minutes earlier, I would have been born in New York. And, that's the whole,
that's right.
um,
I've heard your story. Yeah, it's funny how it's so random. You just
I'm curious, about how much younger your biological siblings are. So she went on and kind of got her life together and had kids. Is that sort of how that happened?
Yeah,
Ish.
ish. Yeah, ish. I have a sister that's only about a year younger than me.
Oh,
And
pretty quickly.
right. And when we were growing up, I would have friends that would see pictures of her and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what if you guys are twins and she only kept one and gave you
Oh,
away because we look so
Wow.
much alike." We look, I mean, like my daughter looks exactly like my sister. We looked exactly alike except for a different hair color. So that was always like my thing as a child. I was like, oh my gosh, like what if we were twins, but that wasn't the case. But she did go on to have three other children. But they they really had their dads raising them. My mom just, I think she had a lot of issues in her own life and her own childhood that she just really wasn't really there to be able to be like full-time mom. And she really struggled with that. So
How would she even be able to, if you think about it, you have a baby at 16, you have to give up,
yeah,
and then and you're on your own on the streets because of something going on, and then 17, it would be very hard.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think so too. And I do understand it. knowing more of the details. I mean, even in the last couple of years, I've kind of pried a little bit more, and she's told me a little bit more about her childhood and some of the things that she had going on and things that happened. And so I definitely don't blame her. But yeah, at this point, I have met my siblings. I don't really have much of a relationship with two of them. They both live so far away, and we just like the one lives in Australia now. So
Oh,
we never have had much of a chance to spend time together. But one of my sisters, we are pretty close. So that's nice.
Is that the one that's right after you?
No, it's actually not. She's, I think about 6 years younger than me. And it's so funny because we have the same handwriting, we have the same personality. We're so much alike. You would think
click.
yeah, you'd think we were raised together. It's really nice. So
So let's backtrack a second. So you grew up and you didn't connect to your family. Your brother was problematic. Were your parents emotionally available to be able to talk about this stuff, or was it just, I mean, because they were obviously going through their own grief of having lost
Mhm.
a child, you were kind of
yeah,
that replacement,
yep.
I guess. So how did that sort of play out and manifest?
You know, it's one of those situations, I think, where on one hand, they would say that they're open about talking about it, and they obviously knew that I was getting these letters and communication with my birth mother. But at the same time, if I talked about it too much, I could definitely tell they didn't want to hear about it. You
Hmm.
know, I definitely got that feeling to just not talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, and especially once I did meet my birth mother, there were a couple times where my dad would say, you really hurt your mom. I'm like,
Oh,
I'm just talking about like you
I
just,
had that.
yeah.
Hmm.
And so I've just kind of learned I don't really discuss it with them. And
Hmm.
it's kind of like this whole second life, you know, you just kind of keep things to yourself. And
It's
yeah,
But
interesting
when did
what,
you,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I
Sorry.
was just gonna say, when did you finally meet your birth mother?
I met her at 16.
Gosh, how did
Yeah.
I
that come
mean,
about?
yeah.
So I became a teen mother myself, and he had a lot of health issues and they were pretty serious. And so at that point, it just really clicked with me. Like a lot of people, it's like when they do have children, they're like, oh, I need to meet my biological family. For me, it was younger, obviously, but I knew that I needed to know my medical history. And it was also a good reason just to be able to meet my mom because I'd always, I'd wanted to my whole life. I just was one of those kids. And so I met her at 16. Yeah,
Wow.
and 8 months pregnant.
So backing up there a little bit. So when you were a teen mother, your family that you were living with, your parents at the time, they were supportive in you keeping your child or no?
They did.
I don't
Um,
want to dig too deep. I'm just curious because that's,
yeah,
mm,
it was just, I look at it now, like thinking about my own kids, I'm like, wow, that's not how I would have handled it. But my family is very, very religious.
oh,
Hmm.
I would say on kind of an extreme side. And so one of the comments to my mother, when my adopted mother met my birth mother, she said, well, the sins of the mother tend to pass down to the daughter.
oh
Ah,
no, no,
Yeah.
no. In front of
And
you?
I didn't hear it. No, I didn't hear it, but my mom told me about it years later. My birth mother told me about it years later. And she just was like, I just couldn't believe she said that. And
ah.
No,
and I
I
thought,
can't
oh
either.
gosh, yeah. Now I have no doubt, there probably was that longing to kind of create my own family because I never
Hmm.
felt like I fit into my family, but there were a lot of other issues going in my family, growing up that definitely also played a part. But and things happen. So
It's interesting that we play this role, adoptees of two different things. Like you see it all the time. You're balancing. We're always balancing. And what Sarah said that you're a replacement baby. I don't know why all these years it just hit me. I'm like, I was a replacement baby. Oh yeah. But it's true in a weird way. You're,
mhm.
and you're just kind of expected to conform and then
Yeah, and I don't think that my adopted mother had ever really healed from that,
no,
not yet at that point anyway.
no.
It was actually on Christmas Eve when she lost that child, and
Oh,
she actually almost died, and they had the funeral of that baby without her even being there,
Oh,
because she was
Gosh.
still in the hospital. And so I am sure that she still had a lot of trauma from that
and
too.
nobody dealt with that stuff. My mom finally told me about that with her, that just it was kind of like, move on.
Yeah.
Let's not discuss it. Nobody really asked her how she was, or
Yeah.
and so you don't, just like us, no, don't say anything. You'll upset
No, you don't talk
everybody.
about things. No. Right.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
So then you were having a baby and your birth mother and your adoptive mother met.
Yeah.
Then like what happened after?
Yeah, they are about as opposite of people as could possibly be. So they didn't, I think that visit went fine, but they didn't really spend much time together. It really was like my birth mom and me spending time together. They spent very little time together. They really didn't have anything in common. So they didn't maintain any sort of a relationship. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine they never even spoke again after that. It's probably just that one time. And then my
But I
birth,
mean, with like, what was the course of,
Yeah.
because I think you mentioned, are you still in touch with your adoptive family?
oh yeah, I am, but well, well, not really, barely. It's like maybe once one conversation this year. It's very minimal. And unfortunately, it's just because we are very different. There's just a lot of things that went on throughout my childhood that were tough to deal with, and they never really got resolved because it's still that mentality of you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's difficult. It's just less stressful to just have a minimal relationship. And it's difficult when you're trying to connect with people that you're just so different from. Your personalities are different. You're just everything. There's just really not much to even talk about, unfortunately. And I think some adoptees are really lucky and they just happen to have things in common, with their adoptive
Yeah.
families, and they click. And I just don't have that. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's
kind of the
more
luck of the
normal.
draw.
Yeah, it is the
Yeah.
luck of the draw,
Yeah.
actually.
I really do. I think, and I don't know. I think that's why some adoptees do, have more of a positive feeling about being adopted
Yeah, of
than
course.
others, because if they clicked and everything went fine, then I'm sure they're going to feel differently about it than if you have the other scenario.
It's whoever picks you up that day. Isn't that just the craziest thing? To me, it's
Yeah,
still mind blowing.
yeah,
I think it's I've said this before, we've talked about it, but it's a kind of a spectrum, right?
Mm.
Adoption, like it just swings one way or the other, and some of it's in the middle, and
yeah,
but it's still the common theme is, we, even if it on the outside looks like we belong, it's really a lack of being in either family. It's kind of a
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember as a kid, someone one time, they'd called and I answered the phone and someone had said my mother's name, and I said, no, no, it's me, it's Angela. And she was like, oh, you sound just like your mom. And I was like, no, I'm adopted. Gonna point that out. I was that kid. Nope, it's impossible.
What do you know about your father, your biological father,
So
besides being a trucker?
yeah. Well, and you know
Mine,
what?
Oh
mine was a
boy.
trucker. Mine's a trucker too.
Really?
Long
Oh,
haul trucker.
yeah. Well, what's really interesting is when I was 14, one of the letters I sent to my mom, I asked her about him. And she sent me a letter back and actually told me his name and said, yep, it's Brian so and so, and he lives in Des Moines, Iowa. Well, me being who I was, playing detective right from a super young age, I
Yeah.
somehow found him. And the adoption agency had attempted to white out his name. Well, white out scratches right off, right?
Right.
So I immediately started my sleuthing, and I found him, and he didn't even know what to say. I called him. I was only 14.
Oh,
And so he was very caught off guard. He was friendly, but I don't really remember communicating with them much again until about 5 years later. And at that point, he said, I don't even know if I'm actually your dad, and I really don't want you to call again.
oh,
Oh,
So I was like, oh, okay.
Also,
And
by the way, how brave of a
Right?
14-year-old to
yeah,
call.
I barely can do it now. I'm like,
yeah,
you were very tenacious,
it
that's
was, I was a problem.
It's weird how like all the adoptees we've talked to over the years, just like, you're one of those that was just like, nope, I don't belong in this
that's
family.
right.
I'm gonna find like Annie from New
Annie.
Zealand, who
Yep.
I don't know if you listen to her episode, but at 6 years old, she's like, you're not my mom. Like
Yeah.
finding out that she was
Yeah.
adopted. So it's just,
Yeah.
it's.
I know. I'm sure it was very frustrating. But
Were you like that from a young age? Like, hey, wait a minute, something's not right here.
yeah, I think inside I was, but I knew I needed to just kind of be the good kid because there were enough issues going on in my household and try not to rock the boat, you know. But when I hit my teen years, yeah, it all came out. I think which typically happens. But so yeah, when I was around 30, I reached back out to who I thought was my dad. And
Oh,
at this time, he was open to getting to know each other. And we spent several months getting to know each other. And we finally did a DNA test, and he was not my dad.
oh no.
Yeah. And I talked to my mom and I said, okay, let's talk about this again. You
Did
know?
he remember your mom? Did he
Oh
actually know
yeah.
you? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so
Oh, that's
it
funny.
could have been. I think it was, she was young, you know, and I'm sure she didn't really, wasn't keeping, really paying attention to dates and, you know, so she was probably off on, things a little bit. But so then I just was kind of at, square one again, trying to figure out who he was. And I've done all the DNA tests, I've done Ancestry and 23andMe, and I did have quite a few hits on my dad's side, but nobody close enough that I could really figure it out until eventually I came across a few first cousins and we figured out who it was. And I kind of went to my mom and I said, do you think it could be, his name was Rick? And she's like, oh yeah, Rick. That's probably who it is.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my gosh, well, why, why didn't you say this 20 years ago?
Oh, Rick.
Yeah, Rick, who was also from California and she had been living in California. And so yeah, at that point, did some more digging, connected with these first cousins, and come to find out, at this time, I was actually living in the Minneapolis area. And come to find out, my dad had been living in the he'd been living in the Minneapolis area for the last 10 years, and I was living 20 minutes away.
Oh.
And he had passed away 2 years
Oh,
before.
Oh,
Yeah. So
we
I
hear
had been
this so
living right there.
often.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was so close, and he had been a veteran, so he was buried at the military cemetery there. And so that next Memorial Day, I went out and I found his grave, and yeah, so I guess that was the first time, actually, just really connecting with this is who my dad is, So
Yeah.
yeah,
did you have any siblings through him?
no, well, he had had one son, and his son had died of a cancer that started in his thyroid.
Mm.
And after my daughter was born, I had a tumor on my thyroid as well. But I caught it and had it removed, but he died from it. So,
Hmm.
yep, he had no other children, and his family, he's all told me, like, oh my gosh, he would have been so excited if he would have known about you. So, at that
That's nice
point,
to hear. That
yeah,
is nice to hear.
it's
Yeah.
nice and kind of a little sad, like he never
It
Sad,
knew,
yeah.
is.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you came into this really young. So what was the trajectory, after you left the home and
Yeah, so I had actually moved out at 16 when I had my child. I was with my son's father. We were together. And so I did move out. I went to college. I kind of did my own thing. I just was ready, I don't know. It just was not a good situation at
yeah.
home. And so yeah, I moved out at 16 and then went on to later get married, and I had two more children. And with my now ex-husband's job, we had ended up in Minnesota, and I'm in Chicago, but my kids are grown and doing well. And So
You stayed with him so young and you know, you're divorced now, but that's pretty
yeah.
big, 16. That's and went to college. That's a lot. You're very mature.
Yeah, well, my first son's father, we did not end up getting married.
Oh,
Yeah, this was
okay.
later
A
on.
different. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was
At
like,
that age, it was just too much
no,
for
that's what I
him.
was surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. No, when my son was born, he had a lot of medical issues and his dad just couldn't take it and he kind of ditched,
Yeah.
we were young,
Yeah.
so yeah, but yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
But I've had a lot of
S-
years to sort through everything. And, it's interesting because it's not been until probably my 40s that I've really sorted through all these feelings like, oh, like that's probably an adoption thing, just hadn't thought about it because I've just been, I've been reconnected for so many years. But um, yeah, like just coming across your podcast and some of the other adoption podcasts, it's just helped so much to sort through like, okay,
And
that's a
also,
normal
I
thing I
think
was going through. Okay. Like,
right, and you don't necessarily connect that because even if you went to therapy, it's not really touched upon. There's not enough training and therapy.
no,
So
no, I had actually tried bringing up my adoption with the therapist once, and she just kind of, yeah, okay. And
yeah,
next,
it's
So
isn't that
yeah,
just astounding?
yeah, yeah, just,
I mean, I was thinking, listening to you, you went through so many things so young that, you know, I've come into this much older, obviously. And just even then in your 40s, you're still figuring out, oh, isn't because it's like it should, you know, people think, oh, well, you're in reunion with your mom. You probably feel this way or that way, but you still have all the issues because
yeah,
reunion doesn't solve that.
I think it's a lifetime
Yeah.
issue,
Hmm.
I just don't know if there's ever going to be a time where I'm going to just be totally settled
No,
with it.
No, I know.
I
We
don't
we
think so.
talk about it is that relinquishment wound healable? And I
Yeah.
just don't think so.
Well,
Um,
and I see that it also affects the next generation,
yes.
Yes.
because my kids
Gosh.
don't really feel that connection with my adoptive parents either,
Yeah.
And it's like somehow that's kind of passed down. Like I didn't really have that connection, and I don't know, my kids didn't really have it either. And so it's like they have this whole side of their family that they just really don't have a close relationship with either, which is kind of,
And maybe some of the issues are passed
That's what
down.
I think.
My son
yeah,
yesterday, we were talking, and he said he's very sensitive to people's vibes, and I'm like
yeah,
that, and like
yep.
Oh,
I
I love her
know.
son. He's
Yeah.
cute.
I get
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I think you are. And I think as adoptees, I think I have read somewhere where we just are. You're very empathetic to
Yeah.
people's feelings. Because we've learned to pick up on that from a young age. I don't even know how old I was, but I remember very young realizing this isn't something my parents want to hear about. You know?
Yeah. It's the
And not
watching.
just that, like
Yeah.
for Becker and for me, it's always like kind of reading the room. Am I safe
Right.
here? Is this person have bad feelings toward, it's that
Yes.
kind
Yeah.
of thing. Just being very, very aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
Agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
All the
Where
reading, whenever I do all the reading, I think this is somewhat more about my child than me. Or just if I had
or
known these
if
things, would I
as
have
much about,
parented?
yeah.
Yeah, as much about would I have parented different? I don't
Hmm.
know, you know, all of it. It's,
Yeah, me too.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
kind of a misfortune to not come to these sort of
Mhm.
awakenings until later in life. Um, well, and
Yeah.
also, there is something to be
Yeah.
said for the fact that the public narrative around adoption
Hmm.
is so ingrained, even in us, that to unravel that and unpack it is a lot. And coming out of the fog is painful. Um,
Yeah, very.
can be
Yeah.
painful.
I
So
think one of the most frustrating things for me has been as I would say, come out of that fog more and understood it more. People don't want to hear anything negative about it,
they do
No.
not.
and then you really just, again, you have to keep it to yourself. And, it's like, I'd like to just be able to like express my thoughts on it or my experience, but you really can't. People don't want to hear that it wasn't just wonderful. And like, my mother would always say, oh, you were chosen. And I'm like,
Ugh.
I was unchosen first. And so, you know, there's definitely just that trauma. It's hard. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. You could get a podcast.
Yeah.
And people make not only if they don't want to talk about it, but then they get like, ugh, you're
Oh,
going on about
that's
this
more what
again.
I
You know,
get.
Yeah. Get
I get
over
the
it.
eye roll. It's kind of like
Yeah.
the eye roll and the like, oh
like let
God,
it
here
go.
comes this story or this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, of course it's to do with your adoption. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can read the room too. So when you start to see someone do that and you start,
Uh-huh.
it just makes you go inward again, just
Yeah.
inward, you
Well,
know?
and
That's
then
why we have to have, that's why having a community of adoptees
yeah.
is,
Yes.
is good.
Yeah.
Right. And
Where are you at now with everything? I know we talked a little bit about just how awful empty nest is.
yep.
But still, I know a couple of siblings you're not that close to, but in terms of your birth mother and the other siblings and how often do you see each other and
Yeah. So, yep, with my adoptive parents, I don't see them often. I don't really go back often either because, another part of it is that once I became an adult, like I have really no aunts, uncles, or cousins that ever even kept in contact with me. So there's not much to go back for. So with them, and then I had, my brother, that was their biological son. We're not close. He's kind of been in and out of jail his whole life. So we're just not really close. But my birth mother, we're pretty close. It's still kind of a work in progress because throughout the years we've had those times where we would talk and then we'd go for stretches where we didn't. At one point, she actually moved to England and was out of the country for several years. And so just the last couple of years, really, we actually talk very consistently and, message on Facebook or whatever, send little, jokes back and forth or whatever. It's just that more mother-daughter relationship, like drive safe, like I know
yeah.
I'm 45, so it's nice to kind of have that motherly care and concern that I actually
Yeah.
really didn't have even with my adoptive mom.
You probably don't even know
Um,
what to do with
and
it.
then one of my sisters, yeah, I know. It's like, what? I've always been taking care of myself. What do you mean?
Yeah.
But yeah. So with my siblings, I'm close with one of them. I still message a little bit with the other two, but we just really haven't had that chance to spend a lot of time together. So maybe one day still, but yeah, my one sister, she has two kids and they do call me, auntie. And
Oh.
so that's nice. And so yeah, I would say I'm probably most close with my biological mom and my one sister at this point.
Have your children met them as well?
Yeah, I always knew that I was adopted, and so it never even occurred to me to not talk about it with them. They've just always known as well.
Yeah.
So I've just, yeah, I don't even really remember having a conversation about it. It's always been like, oh, this is my birth mother, this, and so yeah, they've always known. I wouldn't say that they're as close with them because they're older now. And
Right.
it's really been the last few years that my mom and I have gotten closer. And by that point, like my son was already off to college and my daughter's in college. And so
Yeah, they're not little kids to
yeah,
for
it's kind of
yeah.
hard to form that bond when they're already grown. Uh,
hmm
but but yeah, they're getting there and we'll see where it goes. But at least they do talk and they've been around each other. And so
And
yeah.
they know it's important to you. So, that's
Yeah.
something and they're young. When you're in your 20s, it's not what you're thinking about, you know.
No.
And they may as they get older and have their own children and
Yeah.
that's, as your
Yeah.
mom's young, your mom is young. She's closer to our age.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, she's only 16 years older and
Yeah.
but it's interesting because whenever I would, call like my adoptive mom, we just struggled to have a conversation. There wasn't any like
Yeah.
similarities, things in common and it's like I tried so hard to like figure out things and find things to talk about. It was just such a struggle and yet I'll call up my mom and we can sit there and talk for 2 hours
Yeah.
and I'm just like, you click. And I don't know. And I'm sure it's a different experience for every adoptee, but that's kind of,
There's something if you let yourself, because because I had the better adoption, right?
Yeah.
But I'm very close to my biological cousins, and I spent, my cousin wanted to speak the other day. It was 2.5 hours later. I'm like, I got to get off the phone. Like, it was so easy.
Yeah.
There's just not everybody has that either, though. They go into reunion, it can be very hard. And so I'm glad that you have that part, actually. I really am,
Yeah.
to grow that relationship.
I have a good
Adoption
friend of
is
mine.
complicated.
It,
No doubt.
it is. And I have a good friend of mine. He's like, I have the same issues, but they're my biological family. I was like, yep, it's just it really is
I
luck of the
know
draw. I don't
I
know.
did say that. Yes, that's true. Every family has its own set of problems, but we still have the differences that we were not kept. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a whole other layer.
Yeah. We definitely have a few extra bricks stacked up there. So
Yes, for
yeah.
sure. Because that's also what you hear. Well, I wish I was adopted, or my family's had problems. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
They
Um,
don't know what they're wishing for, right? Because
right.
when you're little, you don't even know what's happened to
I
you.
mean, I've heard adult friends say that. Oh, I wish I'd
Me
been
too.
adopted.
Me
Okay.
too.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
you don't.
For the
You
jokes that,
wish
oh,
you
you
had a
were,
better family is what you wish. Just not, they think
Yeah.
but that's not what you wish, right?
Right.
right. Right.
Um,
And I thought, you know what, if I could choose, I would absolutely have chosen to just really click with my adoptive family and have things in common and just be totally at peace with it. Right. Like no one wants to feel that kind of
Right.
No.
settledness. I'm like, if I could choose, like that's how I would want it,
Yeah.
Of course.
The ones that do have that, like that's wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I don't
You
think
still
anyone,
get the problems though. You still
Hmm.
get the
yeah,
problems.
Well,
I
right
mean,
there, you still have that pre-verbal trauma, right?
mhm.
That is, starting life in a deficit due to that.
yeah. I actually got my original birth certificate like 2 weeks ago. I had been
Oh,
trying for years and they kept telling me, well, you have to petition the judge and you have to tell him why
Oh
you
my,
want
it's
it.
ridiculous.
And I was like, what do you mean? Why do I want it? Why do you want yours?
yeah,
So
I
exactly.
yeah,
mean, ridiculous.
yeah,
Why do you want it? That bothers me right there. Jesus.
yeah. So
Oh
I was
God.
finally able to get it. My birth mom did have to sign a consent form for me to get it.
See,
Because you're a child.
we're still treated like a child.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought, well, what would happen if she what if she was passed away? And she said, well, then you'd have to have her death certificate. Well, how would
Oh,
I
yeah, I
have her
had to
death
go through all.
certificate? But so fortunately I was able to get it. And it was kind of weird because my mom had always said, she goes, I didn't give you a name because it would have been too hard. I knew I was going to have to give you away. So when I got my birth certificate, it was, you know, just blank. And
Mm,
I don't know, strangely difficult to see, like
yeah.
no name, just her last name. Yeah.
You know what? I
Mm,
had never really thought about this before, but I mean, I understand her point. And you think about if let's say the hospital does require, you need to name this baby, how painful that is for
oh,
them too, right? So now I have to name this child that I don't get to keep.
Yeah.
Um, it- Again, another situation in which neither answer is the good answer.
you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm really happy
Yes.
to have met you
Yeah.
and
You too.
heard
Thank
your
you so much.
story and just still I'm gonna have this picture of you as a 14-year-old picking up
I
the phone and
know.
I was flipping through the yellow pages,
Are you my dad?
Yeah.
you scraping off the whiteout and
Yes. I just remember kind of laughing, going, well, geez, they're not very smart. I mean, white just scrapes right off.
Those are like mistakes that won't happen these anymore because
Yeah. Yeah.
When you found out he wasn't your father, did you keep having a relationship at all? Or were you just like, okay, bye? That's always
It,
I know
so
I was
weird.
wondering that.
it was weird. He actually was like, you know what? In my mind, you're my daughter, and
Oh,
let's just keep this between us. He kind of wanted to keep it a secret. And I tried for a little bit and I was like, no, it's just too weird. Cause now I just have this relationship with this grown man that we're not
Yeah, like
related, it was weird. And I just was like,
it's
no.
it's kind he wanted that though, even though he was not kind at the beginning when you were 19. It is kind. It's just,
14,
I always
yeah.
think what happens then, like, okay, bye. We're not,
Yeah,
know,
and I'm
It's
just
so
surprised that my
funny.
mom really thought it was him because I actually looked so much like him, and he had like a penicillin allergy, and my son has a penicillin allergy. Like there were a lot of similarities. I thought, well, it's no wonder she really did think it was him. But yeah,
It's so funny.
no, we
Yeah.
parted ways.
Just this relationship with some
I know.
random
Yeah,
older.
yeah,
Yeah, that doesn't work.
yeah.
It's a little odd.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Really love talking to you and
Yeah, Angela.
getting to know you.
Yeah, you guys too. I love listening to your podcast. It's been so helpful. So I'm excited
Thank
to
you.
be on.
So
Yeah,
glad. That's
Thank
why
you
we're
for
here.
waiting and coming here and telling your story and being with us.
absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Take
right.
care.
You
Take
too.
care. Bye.
Bye.